The woman stumbled off the stagecoach in Fort Lyon, Colorado, her hands trembling as she clutched a worn leather satchel that contained everything she owned, her eyes scanning the dusty street for any sign she had been followed. Clara Winters took a deep breath of the dry September air, the year 1878 marking what she hoped would be a fresh start far from St. Louis, and the blood that stained her memories. She had not meant to kill him, but when her stepfather's hands had wrapped around her throat for the last time, something inside her had snapped. The fire poker had been within reach, and she had swung it with all the strength her 22 years could muster. The sickening crack still echoed in her nightmares, along with the way his body had crumpled to the floor of their parlor. She had fled that very night, taking only what she could carry, leaving behind her mother who had always chosen to look away from the bruises. The main street of Fort Lyon stretched before her, lined with wooden buildings that seemed to lean toward each other as if sharing secrets. A general store, a saloon, a boarding house with peeling white paint, and a stable where horses stamped their feet against the Colorado dust. The Rocky Mountains rose in the distance like a promise of something bigger than herself, their peaks still holding onto the last remnants of snow even as autumn approached. Clara made her way to the boarding house, her simple traveling dress already dusty from the long journey. The elderly woman who answered her knock introduced herself as Mrs. Patterson and showed her to a small room on the second floor that overlooked the street. It was sparse but clean, with a narrow bed, a washstand, and a window that let in the golden afternoon light. "We serve breakfast at 7 and supper at 6, Mrs. Patterson said, her sharp eyes taking in Clara's disheveled appearance. "You running from something or to something, child?" "Does it matter?" Clara asked, her voice hoarse from disuse. "I suppose not. Long as you pay on time and do not bring trouble to my door." Clara paid for a week in advance with coins she had stolen from her stepfather's strongbox, another crime to add to her list. When Mrs. Patterson left, Clara sank onto the bed and allowed herself to cry for the first time since leaving Missouri. She cried for the girl she had been, for the innocent life she would never have, for the weight of taking a human life even if it had been in self-defense. But mostly she cried because she was so very tired of running and did not know if she would ever be able to stop. The next morning, Clara forced herself to venture into town properly. She needed work, needed to establish herself as someone ordinary, someone who would blend in. The general store was hiring, and the owner, a portly man named Mr. Henderson, seemed pleased enough to have an extra pair of hands. Clara told him her name was Clara Worth, changing just enough to feel like a different person. She would stock shelves, help customers, and keep the books. It was honest work, something she desperately needed to feel human again. Days turned into weeks, and Clara fell into a routine that should have been comforting. She woke before dawn, helped Mrs. Patterson with breakfast, walked to the general store, worked until closing, and returned to her room where she read borrowed books by candlelight until exhaustion claimed her. She spoke little to anyone, offering only polite smiles and brief responses. The townspeople seemed to accept her as just another drifter seeking a fresh start in the West. Nothing remarkable about her at all. It was on a Wednesday morning in early October when Ashton Zimmerman first walked into the general store, his boots leaving dusty prints on the wooden floor. Clara was standing on a ladder, reaching for a bolt of fabric on the high shelf, when she heard the door chime. She glanced down and found herself looking into the clearest blue eyes she had ever seen, set in a tanned face that spoke of long days under the sun. He was tall, well over 6 feet, with broad shoulders and the lean, muscular build of a man who made his living through physical labor. His hat was pushed back on his head, revealing dark hair that needed a trim, and his clothing marked him as a working cowboy, practical and worn but clean. "Morning," he said, his voice a low drawl that sent an unexpected shiver down her spine. "I need some supplies. Got a list here." Clara descended the ladder carefully, very aware of his eyes following her movement. She took the list from his outstretched hand, noting the calluses on his fingers, the strength in his grip. "I can help you with this," she said, keeping her voice steady. "Give me just a few minutes." As she moved through the store gathering flour, coffee, beans, salt pork, and the other items on his list, she felt his gaze on her. It was not the leering attention she had endured from men in her past, but something else, something curious and almost gentle. When she had everything assembled on the counter, he smiled at her, and it transformed his entire face. "You are new in town," he said, not quite a question. "A few weeks now. I am Ashton. I work at the Double Z Ranch about 5 miles northwest of here. We come into town for supplies every couple of weeks." "Clara," she offered, then immediately regretted giving even that much information. "Well, Clara, I expect I will be seeing you again." He paid for his supplies, tipped his hat to her, and left, loading everything into the wagon waiting outside. Mr. Henderson chuckled from behind her. "Ashton is a good man. Been working at the Double Z for about 3 years now. Came from Texas originally, I believe. Hardworking, honest, keeps to himself mostly." Clara said nothing, returning to her task of organizing the fabric bolts, but she found her thoughts drifting back to blue eyes and a slow smile throughout the rest of the day. Ashton returned 2 weeks later, and then again 2 weeks after that. Each time, he seemed to linger a little longer at the counter, asking Clara questions about herself that she deflected with questions of her own. She learned that he was 26 years old, that he had been working cattle since he was 14, that he loved the open range and the mountains, but sometimes missed the warmth of Texas winters. He learned almost nothing about her except that she liked books and had come from the East seeking a change. "You are awful mysterious," he said one day in November, as the first snow began to fall outside the store windows. "Makes a man curious." "Some things are better left alone," Clara replied, wrapping his purchases in brown paper. "And some things are worth pursuing." His eyes held hers for a long moment before he smiled again. "You ever been on a horse, Clara?" "Once or twice when I was young." "Would you like to go riding sometime? I could show you the ranch, the mountains. It is beautiful country out there." Every instinct Clara had developed over the past month screamed at her to refuse, to maintain the walls she had built around herself. But there was something about Ashton that made her want to say yes, want to believe that maybe she could have something normal and good despite everything. "I do not know," she said finally. "Think about it. Offer stands whenever you are ready." He tipped his hat and left, and Clara watched through the window as he drove away in the wagon, snow beginning to settle on his shoulders. That night, lying in her narrow bed, Clara allowed herself to imagine what it might be like to accept his invitation. To ride through the mountains with a man who looked at her like she was worth knowing. To feel the sun on her face and the wind in her hair without constantly looking over her shoulder. But then the memories would crash back. Her stepfather's face, the weight of the fire poker in her hands, the certainty that she was a killer and killers did not deserve happiness. Winter settled over Fort Lyon with a fierce beauty. The snow piled high against the buildings, and the mountains became white giants in the distance. Business at the general store slowed, and Clara found herself with more time to think, which was both a blessing and a curse. She had been in Colorado for 3 months now, and there had been no sign of anyone looking for her. Perhaps her mother had not reported her missing. Perhaps they had ruled it an accident. Or perhaps the law was simply taking its time, gathering evidence before they came to drag her back to Missouri to hang. Ashton came to town less frequently due to the weather, but he always made a point of visiting the general store even when it was clear he did not need supplies. He would stand at the counter and talk to Clara about the ranch, about the cattle they were keeping fed through the winter, about the other cowboys who worked there. He told her funny stories that made her laugh despite herself, and slowly, so slowly she barely noticed it happening, the walls around her heart began to develop cracks. It was 2 days before Christmas when everything changed. Clara was closing up the store, Mr. Henderson having left early to spend time with his family, when she heard shouting from the saloon down the street. This was not particularly unusual, but something about the tone made her pause at the door, her hand on the lock. Then she heard a gunshot, sharp and unmistakable, and her blood ran cold. Men poured out of the saloon, and Clara pressed herself against the store window, trying to see what was happening. A man stumbled into the street, blood staining his shirt, and fell face first into the snow. 2 other men followed, one of them waving a pistol wildly, both clearly drunk. The town marshal, an older man named Crawford, came running from his office, his own weapon drawn. "Put the gun down, Illy," Marshal Crawford called out. "Nobody else needs to get hurt." But Illy, whoever he was, seemed beyond reason. He fired again, the bullet whizzing past the marshal and shattering a window across the street. People screamed and scattered, and Clara found herself frozen, transported back to that night in St. Louis, to violence and blood and the terrible moment when everything changed. Then Ashton was there, seemingly from nowhere, tackling Illy from behind. The 2 men went down hard, struggling in the snow, and Clara's heart stopped as she watched them fight for control of the gun. Ashton was stronger, pinning Illy's arm down until the man had no choice but to release his weapon. Marshal Crawford rushed forward, putting Illy in irons while Ashton stood and brushed snow from his clothes. Clara did not realize she had opened the door and run outside until she was standing in front of Ashton, her hands reaching for him without permission, checking him for injuries. "Are you hurt? I saw you go down and I thought—" "I am fine," Ashton said, catching her hands in his. "Clara, I am fine. Look at me." She did, and the concern in his eyes was not for himself but for her. "You are shaking," he said softly. "I thought he was going to kill you. Takes more than a drunk cowboy to do me in." He smiled, but it faded when he saw the tears on her cheeks. "Come on, let me walk you back to the boarding house. You should not be out here." Clara let him guide her through the snowy streets, her mind still reeling. The man who had been shot was being carried to the doctor's office, and she heard someone say he would probably survive. Small mercies. When they reached Mrs. Patterson's boarding house, Ashton walked her right up to the porch, his hand warm and steady on her elbow. "Thank you," Clara managed to say, "for walking me home." "Clara, what is it you are running from?" The question hit her like a physical blow. "What?" "I have been watching you for months now. You jump at loud noises, you never talk about your past. You look over your shoulder like you expect someone to appear and drag you away. What happened to you?" "I cannot tell you." Her voice broke on the words, "cannot or will not. Both." "Please, Ashton, just let it be." He studied her for a long moment, snow falling around them, turning his dark hair white. "I am a patient man, Clara, but I want you to know something. Whatever it is, whatever you have done or whatever was done to you, I do not care. I have known plenty of people with pasts they would rather forget. This is the West. That is why most of us are here. You do not know what you are saying? Then tell me. Let me decide." But Clara could not. She pulled away from him and fled inside, leaving him standing in the snow, and she did not come down for supper that night despite Mrs. Patterson's gentle knocking on her door. The next morning, Clara almost did not go to work. The urge to pack her bag and catch the next stagecoach out of Fort Lyon was overwhelming. But that was what she had been doing for months, running and running without ever stopping, and she was so tired. Besides, where would she go? The law would find her eventually, or she would spend the rest of her life looking over her shoulder, never allowing herself to be happy, never allowing herself to love or be loved. She went to work. Ashton did not come to the store that day or the next, and Clara told herself it was for the best even as her heart ached with his absence. Mr. Henderson gave her a small bonus for Christmas, and Mrs. Patterson made a special dinner that Clara forced herself to attend, making polite conversation with the other boarders while her mind was miles away. On Christmas evening, there was a knock on Clara's door. She opened it to find Ashton standing in the hallway, hat in his hands, snow on his shoulders. Mrs. Patterson must have let him in, though the woman was strict about men visiting the female boarders. "Can I come in?" he asked. "That would not be proper." "Then come downstairs. There is a sitting room. We can talk there." Clara followed him down, and they settled in the small parlor where Mrs. Patterson allowed guests. A fire crackled in the hearth, and the room smelled of pine from the small tree decorated in the corner. Ashton sat across from her, leaning forward with his elbows on his knees, his expression serious. "I have been thinking," he said, "about what I said the other night, and I want you to know I meant it. Whatever you are running from, it does not matter to me. But I understand if you cannot trust me with it. We all have our demons." "Why do you care?" Clara asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "You barely know me." "I know enough. I know you are kind to customers even when they are rude. I know you love books, and you get this little smile when you read something that pleases you. I know you work hard and you are honest, and you have the saddest eyes I have ever seen. I know that when I am around you, I feel like maybe I could be more than just a cowboy who spends his life chasing cattle. And I know that I am falling in love with you, Clara, whether that is wise or not." The words hung in the air between them, precious and terrifying. Clara felt something break open inside her chest, something that had been locked away for so long she had forgotten what it felt like. "I killed a man," she said, the words tumbling out before she could stop them. "My stepfather. He was a cruel man who hurt my mother and hurt me for years. One night he tried to strangle me and I hit him with a fire poker. He died and I ran. I have been running ever since. If the law catches up with me, they will hang me." Ashton did not flinch, did not look away, did not recoil in horror. He simply nodded slowly, processing her confession. "Was it self-defense?" "Yes, but who would believe me? A young woman killing her stepfather in their own home. They would say I am a murderer." "You are not a murderer. A murderer kills in cold blood. You protected yourself. The law might not see it that way." Ashton stood and came to sit beside her on the small sofa, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from him. "Listen to me, Clara. You can stop running now. You can stay here, build a life. I will help you. If the law comes, we will face it together. We will get you a good lawyer, we will tell the truth, and we will fight. But I do not think they are coming. It has been months. If they were going to pursue it, they would have by now. You do not know that." "No, I do not. But I know that you cannot live the rest of your life in fear. That is not living at all." He took her hand, his touch gentle but firm. "Stay, Clara, stop running. Give yourself a chance to be happy." Tears streamed down her face and she did not try to stop them. "I do not know if I deserve to be happy. Everyone deserves that chance. Everyone." Clara looked into his blue eyes and saw nothing but sincerity and compassion. This man, this good, honest man, knew her darkest secret and had not turned away. He was offering her something she had thought impossible, a future. "I am scared," she whispered. "I know." but you do not have to be scared alone anymore." And then, because words were insufficient, Clara leaned forward and kissed him. It was soft and tentative and full of hope, and when Ashton kissed her back, his hand coming up to cup her cheek, Clara felt something she had not felt in a very long time. Safe. They sat in the parlor for hours, talking quietly by the fire. Ashton told her more about his life, about growing up in Texas with a father who drank too much, and a mother who worked herself to death trying to keep the family together. He told her about coming to Colorado seeking a fresh start, about the years of hard work that had earned him respect at the Double Z Ranch. He told her his dreams of one day having his own land, his own cattle, a home to call his own. Clara told him about her childhood before her father died, when things had been good and she had been happy. She told him about her mother's remarriage to a man who seemed charming at first, but revealed his true nature once the vows were spoken. She told him about the years of walking on eggshells, of trying to be invisible, of the growing violence that her mother refused to acknowledge. And she told him about that final night, the fear and the rage and the terrible finality of it. "I am so sorry you went through that," Ashton said, his thumb brushing away her tears. "No one should have to live that way. I keep thinking about my mother. I left her there with his body. I do not even know what happened after. Maybe that is something we can find out, carefully. We could write to someone you trust, ask questions without revealing where you are." The idea had not occurred to Clara. "I do not know if there is anyone I trust back there. Think about it. You do not have to decide now, but if you want answers, we will find a way to get them." When Ashton finally left that night, with a promise to return soon, Clara climbed the stairs to her room feeling lighter than she had in months. The weight of her secret was still there, but it was shared now, and that made all the difference. Winter deepened, and Clara and Ashton's relationship blossomed despite the cold. He came to town every week now, sometimes more often, and they would walk together through the snowy streets, have dinner at the small restaurant near the boarding house, or sit in Mrs. Patterson's parlor and talk for hours. Ashton was patient and kind, never pushing Clara beyond what she was comfortable with, content to let their love grow at its own pace. In January, Ashton took Clara to meet his boss at the Double Z Ranch. They rode out on a clear, cold morning, Clara seated in front of Ashton on his horse, his arms around her keeping her warm and steady. The ranch was impressive, sprawling across the valley with the mountains rising behind it. The main house was solid and well built, smoke curling from its chimney, and the barns and outbuildings spoke of prosperity. Ashton's boss, a man named Zachary Davis, was in his 50s with gray threading through his brown hair and eyes that had seen much of life. His wife, Rebecca, was warm and welcoming, immediately taking Clara under her wing and showing her around while Ashton discussed ranch business with Zachary. "Ashton is a good man," Rebecca said as they walked through the ranch house. "We have known him for years, and he has never shown interest in a woman the way he does with you. You must be special." "I think he is the special one," Clara replied honestly. "Then you are well matched. We need more good women out here, Clara. I hope you will consider staying in Fort Lyon." "I am beginning to think I might." That afternoon, Zachary offered Ashton a new position, foreman of the ranch. It came with better pay and a small house on the property that was currently being used for storage but could be fixed up. Ashton accepted, his eyes finding Clara's as he did, and she understood the unspoken question in his gaze. Would she be willing to share that house with him? Would she be willing to build a life here? On the ride back to town, Clara rested her head against Ashton's chest and said, "I would like to see that house, the one that comes with your new position." She felt rather than saw his smile. We could ride out next week. It needs work, but it has good bones. 2 bedrooms, a nice kitchen, a porch that faces the mountains. It sounds perfect. Clara, are you saying what I think you are saying? She turned in his arms to look at him. I am saying I want to stop running. I want to build a life here. With you. I love you, Ashton said, his voice rough with emotion. I have loved you since the first day I saw you on that ladder in the general store, looking like you carried the weight of the world on your shoulders. I love you too. I did not think I would ever be able to say that to anyone, but I do. I love you, Ashton. He kissed her then, long and deep, right there on the snowy trail with the mountains watching. When they finally broke apart, both breathless and laughing, Clara felt something she had never expected to feel again: joy. The next months were a flurry of activity. Ashton moved into the foreman's house and began the work of making it livable. He spent every spare moment repairing walls, replacing boards, installing new windows, and generally transforming the neglected building into a home. Clara helped whenever she could, and slowly the house began to take shape. She made curtains, Ashton built furniture, and together they painted the walls a warm cream color that made the rooms feel bright even in winter. In March, Ashton asked Clara to marry him. There was no grand gesture, no elaborate plan. They were in the house, Clara painting trim while Ashton installed shelves in the kitchen, when he simply turned to her and said, "Will you marry me, Clara?" She nearly dropped her paintbrush. What? I know we have not been together that long, not in the traditional sense. But I know what I want. I want to wake up next to you every morning. I want to build this life with you. I want children running through this house and growing old watching the sunset from that porch. I want all of it, Clara, with you. So will you marry me? Yes, Clara said, her voice steady and sure. Yes, I will marry you. Ashton crossed the room in 2 strides and swept her into his arms, spinning her around while she laughed. When he set her down, he pulled a simple gold band from his pocket. It was my mother's. It is not fancy, but it is perfect, Clara said, sliding it onto her finger. It fit perfectly, as if it had been made for her. They were married in April in a small ceremony at the church in Fort Lyon. Mrs. Patterson cried. Mr. Henderson gave Clara away, and Zachary and Rebecca stood as witnesses. Marshal Crawford attended, along with many of the townspeople who had come to know and respect Clara during her time at the general store. She wore a simple dress of pale blue that Rebecca had helped her make, and Ashton wore his best clothes, his hair finely trimmed, his face clean-shaven and bright with happiness. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, and Ashton kissed her in front of everyone, Clara felt the last piece of her past fall away. She was no longer Clara Winters, the frightened girl running from murder. She was Clara Zimmerman, a woman building a future with the man she loved. They moved into the house at the Double Z Ranch, and Clara quickly adapted to ranch life. She kept a large garden, learned to cook for the ranch hands who often stopped by for meals, and helped Rebecca with various tasks around the main house. She and Ashton fell into an easy rhythm, working side by side during the day and falling into each other's arms at night. Summer came, hot and dry, and with it the hard work of managing the cattle and the ranch. Ashton was often gone for long hours, riding the range, checking fences, dealing with the 100 problems that arose daily. But he always came home to Clara, and she always had dinner waiting and a smile on her face. It was in August when the letter arrived. Clara had written to an old friend from St. Louis months earlier, carefully wording her questions to seem like casual curiosity. The reply finally came, forwarded through several addresses to protect Clara's location, and what she read made her sink into a chair with relief so profound she felt dizzy. Her stepfather's death had been ruled an accident. Her mother had told the authorities that he had been drinking heavily, had fallen, and hit his head. There was an investigation, but no charges were ever filed. Clara's disappearance had been noted, but her mother had told everyone she had gone to live with relatives in California. No one was looking for her. No one was coming. She was free. When Ashton came home that evening, Clara met him at the door with tears streaming down her face. He immediately pulled her into his arms, alarmed. "What is wrong? What happened?" "Nothing is wrong," Clara said, laughing through her tears. "Everything is right. I am free, Ashton. The law is not coming. They ruled it an accident. I am free." Ashton held her tight, his own eyes growing damp. "Thank God, thank God." That night, they sat on their porch watching the sun set over the mountains, and Clara felt the last chain fall away. She was truly free now, free to live without fear, free to love without reservation, free to be happy. Autumn came again, marking a full year since Clara had first arrived in Fort Lyon. The leaves turned gold and red in the valleys, and the first snow dusted the mountain peaks. Clara discovered she was pregnant in October, and Ashton's joy was so enormous he picked her up and spun her around despite her protests that he would make her dizzy. "We are going to have a baby," he kept saying, wonder in his voice. "A baby, Clara." "I know," she laughed. "I was there when it happened." He set her down carefully, as if she might break, and placed his hand on her still, flat belly. "I am going to be a father. You are going to be an excellent father." Throughout the winter, Ashton fussed over Clara like a mother hen, constantly worried she was working too hard or getting too tired. Clara found it endearing and exasperating in equal measure, but she loved him for it. Rebecca was a constant source of advice and support, having raised 5 children of her own, and Mrs. Patterson knitted enough baby clothes to outfit triplets. The baby came in June of 1880, on a warm morning when the world smelled of wildflowers and possibility. The labor was long and hard, but when Clara finally held her son in her arms, every moment of pain was forgotten. He was perfect, with dark hair like his father and eyes that would eventually turn the same clear blue. "Samuel," Clara said, looking at Ashton, who sat on the bed beside her, staring at his son with awe. "I would like to name him Samuel after my father." "Samuel Zimmerman," Ashton said, testing the name. "It is perfect. He is perfect. You are perfect." "We are perfect," Clara corrected, shifting the baby so Ashton could hold him. "All of us together." Watching her husband hold their son, tears of joy streaming unashamedly down his face, Clara thought about the scared woman who had stepped off the stagecoach in Fort Lyon nearly 2 years ago. That woman had been running, always running, convinced she did not deserve happiness or love. But Ashton had seen past her fear and her secrets to the woman beneath, and he had offered her something she had desperately needed: the chance to stop running. Life settled into a new rhythm with Samuel. The nights were sleepless, the days exhausting, but Clara had never been happier. Ashton was a devoted father, coming home between ranch duties to help with the baby, walking the floor with Samuel when he cried, changing diapers without complaint. Zachary gave Ashton more responsibilities and another raise, and they began to save money seriously, planning for their future. Samuel's first birthday was celebrated with a party at the ranch, attended by everyone they knew in Fort Lyon. Mrs. Patterson made a cake, Rebecca organized games, and Marshall Crawford even showed up with a wooden horse he had carved himself. As Clara watched her son smash cake into his face while everyone laughed, Ashton's arm around her waist, she felt a contentment so deep it almost hurt. "Are you happy?" Ashton asked quietly, his lips near her ear. "More than I ever thought possible." "Good, because I plan to spend the rest of my life making sure you stay that way." 2 years later, in the spring of 1883, Zachary approached Ashton with an offer that would change everything. He was getting older, he said, and he wanted to retire, spend more time with Rebecca traveling and visiting their children who had scattered across the West. He offered to sell the Double Z Ranch to Ashton for a fair price with generous payment terms. Ashton came home that evening stunned, and he and Clara stayed up late into the night discussing it. It was an enormous opportunity, but also an enormous risk. They would be taking on debt, taking on the responsibility of running an entire ranch. But it was also everything Ashton had ever dreamed of. "What do you think?" Ashton asked Clara. "It is a big decision and it affects you too." "I think you would regret it for the rest of your life if you said no," Clara replied. "And I think you would be brilliant at it. We would be brilliant at it. It will be hard work. Harder than what we are doing now. We have never been afraid of hard work." So Ashton accepted, and by summer they were the owners of the Double Z Ranch. Zachary and Rebecca stayed on for a few months to help with the transition, and then they departed for their travels, promising to visit often. Ashton threw himself into running the ranch with the same dedication he brought to everything, and Clara stood beside him, managing the books, organizing the household, and caring for Samuel, who was growing into a bright, curious 3-year-old. In the fall of 1884, Clara gave birth to their second child, a daughter they named Rose. She had Clara's auburn hair and a temperament to match, fierce and determined from the moment she drew her first breath. Samuel was initially skeptical of his baby sister, but within weeks he had become her devoted protector, always wanting to help feed her or fetch her blankets. The ranch prospered under Ashton's management. He was fair to the ranch hands, paid them well, and treated them with respect, which earned him loyalty and hard work in return. He made smart decisions about breeding the cattle, about when to sell and when to hold, about how to invest the profits. Within a few years, the Double Z had become one of the most successful ranches in the region. Clara found her own rhythm in ranch life. She expanded her garden until it provided most of their vegetables, learned to preserve and can food for the winter, and became known for her hospitality. Ranch hands knew they could always get a good meal at the Zimmerman house, and travelers seeking work knew to stop at the Double Z first. Clara also started a small school on the ranch, teaching Samuel and the children of the ranch hands their letters and numbers. The years passed in a blur of work and love and laughter. Samuel grew tall and strong like his father, learning to ride almost before he could walk. Rose was smaller but fierce, afraid of nothing, scaling trees and catching snakes and keeping her older brother on his toes. In 1887, Clara gave birth to twins, boys they named James and Robert, and the house that had once seemed so spacious suddenly felt full to bursting with life and noise and joy. Ashton proved to be an exceptional father, patient and loving but firm when needed. He taught his sons to ride, to work cattle, to respect the land and the animals. He taught Rose that she could do anything her brothers could do, and often she proved she could do it better. And through it all, his love for Clara never wavered. If anything, it grew deeper with each passing year, rooted in shared experiences and mutual respect. On their 10th wedding anniversary, in April of 1890, Ashton took Clara up into the mountains for a rare day alone. They left the children with Rebecca, who had returned to the area after Zachary's death the previous year, and rode to a high meadow where wildflowers bloomed in impossible profusion. They spread a blanket and lay in the sun, holding hands, talking about everything and nothing. "Do you ever think about St. Louis?" Ashton asked. "About your mother?" Clara was quiet for a moment. "Sometimes. I wrote to her once a few years ago letting her know I was safe and happy. She wrote back once, a brief letter saying she was glad. We have not corresponded since. I think that part of my life is truly behind me now. Any regrets? Only that I did not find you sooner. She rolled onto her side to look at him. You saved me, Ashton. I was drowning and you pulled me out. You saved yourself, he corrected, brushing a strand of hair from her face. I just gave you a reason to stop running. You are my reason for everything. He kissed her then, soft and sweet and full of a love that had only grown stronger with time. When they rode back down the mountain as the sun set, Clara felt a profound gratitude for the life she had built, the family she had created, the love she had found in the most unexpected place. The 1890s brought changes to Fort Lyon and the surrounding area. The railroad expanded, bringing more people and more commerce. The town grew, adding new businesses and new families. The wild days of the West were fading, replaced by a more settled civilization. But some things remained constant. The mountains still rose majestically in the distance, the cattle still needed tending, and the Zimmerman family still worked the Double Z Ranch with dedication and love. Samuel turned 18 in 1898, a man now, though Clara still saw the boy he had been. He was handsome like his father, with the same blue eyes and easy smile, and he had grown into a skilled rancher with a natural talent for working with horses. Rose was 16, beautiful and headstrong, already turning heads in town, though she seemed completely unaware of it, more interested in books and horses than boys. The twins were 11, identical in appearance but different in temperament, James quiet and thoughtful while Robert was always in motion, always into mischief. Ashton was 48 now, his dark hair threaded with silver, lines around his eyes from years of squinting into the sun. He was still strong and capable, still the man Clara had fallen in love with, though time had added character to his face and wisdom to his words. Clara herself was 42, her auburn hair faded slightly but her spirit undiminished. She had grown into herself over the years, the scared girl completely gone, replaced by a confident woman who knew her own worth and her own strength. That summer, Samuel announced he wanted to start his own ranch. He had saved money from his work on the Double Z, and he had found land for sale north of Fort Lyon, good grazing land near water. Ashton and Clara discussed it privately, and though Clara's heart ached at the thought of her eldest leaving, they both agreed it was time to let him try. They helped Samuel buy the land, and gave him several head of cattle from the Double Z to start his own herd. It was hard watching him ride away to his own place, but Clara took comfort in knowing he was only a few hours away and that they had raised him well, given him the tools he needed to succeed. Rose, meanwhile, announced she wanted to become a teacher. She had been helping Clara with the ranch school for years, and she had a natural gift for it. They arranged for her to attend the teacher training program in Denver, and she left in the fall of 1899, promising to write every week. She kept that promise, her letters full of excitement about her studies and her life in the city, though she always ended them by saying she missed the ranch and the mountains. The twins were still too young to know what they wanted, content to be boys, to fish and hunt and explore and drive their parents to distraction with their endless energy. Ashton often said that the twins had given him more gray hair than all the years of ranching combined. The turn of the century came, 1900 arriving with celebrations and hope for the future. The Zimmermans gathered at the ranch with friends and neighbors to mark the occasion, toasting the new century and all it might bring. Clara stood on the porch of her home, watching the people she loved laughing and celebrating, and felt a deep sense of peace. She had come so far from that scared woman on the stagecoach. She had built a life beyond her wildest dreams, Ashton found her there, slipping his arm around her waist. "What are you thinking about?" "Everything. Nothing. How lucky I am." "We are lucky," he corrected. "Both of us. You told me I could stop running, do you remember?" "I remember." "You were right. I stopped running and I found everything I never knew I needed." They stood together in the moonlight, watching their children and friends celebrate, and Clara knew that despite all the hardships, despite all the pain of her past, she would not change a single thing. Every step of her journey had led her here, to this man, to this life, to this moment of perfect contentment. The early 1900s brought more changes. Samuel married a sweet girl named Elizabeth, and they started a family of their own, giving Ashton and Clara their first grandchild in 1902, a boy named David. Rose returned from Denver with her teaching certificate and took a position at the school in Fort Lyon, boarding with Mrs. Patterson, who was now quite elderly but still sharp as a tack. The twins, now teenagers, had finally settled down somewhat, channeling their energy into ranch work and developing into capable young men. The Double Z continued to prosper. Ashton had invested wisely over the years, diversifying beyond just cattle to include horse breeding as well. Their horses became known throughout Colorado for their quality, and buyers came from as far as Denver and Santa Fe. Clara took over the bookkeeping entirely, managing the ranch's finances with a careful eye and a natural talent for numbers. They built a new, larger barn in 1904, and Ashton finally convinced Clara to take a trip they had been planning for years. They traveled to California, leaving the ranch in the capable hands of their foreman and their sons, and spent 2 glorious weeks seeing the ocean for the first time and exploring San Francisco. It was an adventure Clara had never imagined she would have, and Ashton delighted in showing her new things, seeing her face light up with wonder. On the train ride home, Clara rested her head on Ashton's shoulder and said, "Thank you for showing me the world." "That was just California," Ashton teased. "The world is much bigger." "It is big enough for me. Everything I need is back at the ranch." In 1906, disaster struck when a fire swept through part of the ranch, started by a lightning strike during a dry summer storm. They lost one barn and several outbuildings before Ashton and the ranch hands managed to get it under control. No one was hurt and the house was spared, but it was a stark reminder of how quickly everything could change. They rebuilt, as they always did, the entire community coming together to help. Neighbors showed up with lumber and tools, and within a month the barn was standing again, even better than before. It reminded Clara of why she loved this life, this place, these people who understood that survival meant helping each other. The twins left home in 1907, James to study law in Denver and Robert to join Samuel on his ranch. The house felt empty without their noise and chaos, but Clara knew it was the natural order of things. Children grew up and left, and parents learned to let go. At least Rose was still nearby, visiting every Sunday for dinner and filling them in on all the town gossip. Ashton turned 60 in 1910, and Clara threw him a surprise party that brought together everyone they knew. Samuel brought his family, now including 3 children. Rose brought a young man named Thomas, a fellow teacher, and introduced him as her beau. The twins came home, James bringing stories of the law firm where he worked and Robert with tales of expanding Samuel's ranch. The house overflowed with people and laughter and love, and Ashton declared it the best birthday he had ever had. Later that night, after everyone had gone and they were alone in their bedroom, Ashton pulled Clara into his arms. "I cannot believe I am 60 years old. Age is just a number." An increasingly large number. He smiled, but it faded into something more serious. "Clara, I want you to know that these years with you have been the best of my life. You gave me everything I never knew I wanted. We gave each other everything, Clara said, touching his face. And we are not done yet. We have many more years ahead of us. And they did. Rose married Thomas in 1911, a beautiful wedding at the church in Fort Lyon followed by a reception at the ranch. James married a woman named Catherine in 1913, and Robert married his sweetheart Lucy in 1914. More grandchildren came, until Clara lost count of how many she had, only knowing that her heart expanded to hold each one. The First World War touched their lives when James enlisted in 1917, despite being in his 30s with a wife and children. He survived the war, thank God, but came home changed, quieter, haunted by things he would not speak of. Clara and Ashton helped him heal as best they could, giving him time and space and love until gradually he found his way back to himself. The 1920s roared in with change and modernity. Automobiles became common, electricity reached Fort Lyon, and the world seemed to speed up. But at the Double Z Ranch, life continued at its own pace. The work still needed doing, the cattle still needed tending, and Ashton, now in his 70s, still rode out every day, though he tired more easily than he once had. Clara was 66 now, her auburn hair completely silver, her face lined with years of laughter and hard work and life well lived. She moved a little slower than she once had, her joints aching on cold mornings, but her mind was sharp and her heart was full. She spent her days tending her garden, spoiling her grandchildren and now great-grandchildren, and sitting on the porch with Ashton in the evenings, holding his hand and watching the sun set over the mountains. Samuel had taken over most of the active management of the ranch, though Ashton still consulted on major decisions. It was a gradual transition, done with grace and mutual respect, and Clara was proud of the man her son had become. All of her children had turned out well, really, each of them finding their own path, each of them happy in their own way. On a summer evening in 1925, Clara and Ashton celebrated their 45th wedding anniversary. The family gathered at the ranch for a big celebration. Multiple generations spanning from infants to grandparents, all of them connected by blood and love. As Clara looked around at the faces of her children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, she marveled at how one decision, one choice to stop running, had led to all of this. That night, after everyone had left or gone to bed, Clara and Ashton sat on their porch as they did every evening. The sky was full of stars, the air was warm and sweet with the scent of wildflowers, and the mountains were dark silhouettes against the twilight. 45 years, Ashton said, his hand firm in Clara's despite his age. Who would have thought that day in the general store that we would end up here? I knew, Clara said. Maybe not consciously, but somewhere deep inside I knew you were going to change my life. We changed each other's lives. Yes, Clara agreed. We did. They sat in comfortable silence, the kind that only came from decades of companionship, and Clara thought about the journey that had brought her here. From that terrified woman on the stagecoach, running from her past and certain she would never find peace, to this woman sitting beside the love of her life, surrounded by a family she had created and a legacy that would outlast her. She thought about that moment, decades ago now, when Ashton had looked at her with those clear blue eyes and said, "You can stop running now." It had been a promise and a challenge and an offering all at once. And she had accepted it, had chosen to trust him, had chosen to believe that maybe she deserved happiness after all. It had been the best decision of her life. Ashton's health began to decline in 1927. Nothing dramatic at first, just a gradual slowing down, more days when he stayed close to the house instead of riding out, more evenings when he fell asleep in his chair after dinner. Clara fussed over him, making sure he ate well and rested enough, while Ashton insisted he was fine and she was worrying over nothing. But in the spring of 1928, he took a fall from his horse while out checking fences. Samuel found him and brought him home, and though the doctor said nothing was broken, Ashton seemed diminished somehow, as if the fall had taken something essential from him. He recovered physically, but he never quite regained his former energy. Clara nursed him devotedly, just as he had cared for her through illnesses and difficult pregnancies over the years. They had always been partners, taking care of each other, and she would not stop now. She read to him when he was too tired to do anything else, sat with him on the porch when he felt strong enough, held his hand through the long nights when pain or restlessness kept him awake. On a warm evening in June of 1928, Ashton asked Clara to help him outside. They settled on the porch swing he had built decades ago, the same swing where they had watched their children grow, where they had celebrated victories and weathered sorrows. The sun was setting, painting the mountains in shades of gold and pink, and the world was peaceful. "I want you to know something," Ashton said, his voice quieter than it used to be but still steady. "I have lived a good life, Clara, better than I ever expected, and it is all because of you." "Do not talk like that," Clara said, though fear clutched at her heart. "You have many more years ahead of you. Maybe, maybe not. But just in case, I need you to hear this. You made me happier than I ever thought possible. You gave me children and grandchildren and a life full of love. You turned this ranch into a home. You turned me into the man I always wanted to be." Tears streamed down Clara's face. "You did the same for me. You saved me, Ashton." "No," he said gently, his hand cupping her cheek just as it had that first time he kissed her decades ago. "You saved yourself. I just gave you a safe place to land." They sat together until the stars came out, and then Samuel and Rose helped them inside. Ashton went to bed early, and Clara lay beside him, listening to him breathe, memorizing the sound. He died peacefully in his sleep 2 days later, Clara holding his hand, surrounded by his children and grandchildren. He was 78 years old, and he slipped away with a slight smile on his face, as if he was seeing something wonderful just beyond reach. The grief was profound, a physical ache in Clara's chest that never quite went away. They buried Ashton on a hill overlooking the ranch, with a view of the mountains he had loved so much. The entire town turned out for the funeral, testament to the life he had lived and the respect he had earned. Clara thought she might die of heartbreak those first few weeks. 45 years of marriage, of partnership, of love, and suddenly she was alone. The house felt empty without him, the ranch felt strange, the world felt diminished. But her children rallied around her, and gradually Clara found a way to keep living. She knew Ashton would want that, would not want her to waste the years she had left. She stayed at the ranch, now run entirely by Samuel with help from Robert and their children. She kept her garden, watched her great-grandchildren grow, and every evening she sat on the porch and talked to Ashton as if he was still beside her. Sometimes she swore she could feel his presence, a warmth beside her, a hand in hers. Clara lived to be 86 years old, dying peacefully in her sleep on a winter morning in 1943. Her children found her in her bed, a letter clutched in her hand. It was a letter Ashton had written to her years ago and that she had kept, reading it whenever she missed him too much. It spoke of love and gratitude and the promise that they would find each other again someday, somewhere. They buried Clara beside Ashton on the hill, and on her gravestone they carved her name, the dates of her long life, and a simple phrase: "She stopped running and found love." The Double Z Ranch stayed in the family, passed down through generations, each one adding to the legacy that Ashton and Clara had built. The house still stood, enlarged and modernized over the years, but fundamentally the same. The mountains still rose in the distance, eternal and unchanging. And the story of the cowboy and the woman running from her past became a family legend, told and retold to each new generation. Because it was a story worth telling, a story of second chances and redemption, of love that healed old wounds and created new possibilities. It was a story that proved that no matter how dark your past, no matter how far you ran, you could always find your way home if you were brave enough to stop and let someone love you. And in the end, that was what Clara had done. She had stopped running. And she had found everything she never knew she needed: a home, a family, a purpose, and a love that lasted beyond death itself. She had found her happily ever after on a ranch in Colorado, with a cowboy who looked at her and saw not her past but her future, who offered her his hand and his heart and asked only that she be brave enough to accept. She had been brave enough, and it had made all the difference.